way back in the day when I played, many schools went to football camp at the beginning of fall practice. August, sweltering heat, August. We went to camp back in the late 60s when I played, and it was a great experience. We practiced at least 4 times a day, and we bonded as a team by living and eating together for about a week in those days. It was brutal. Unlike today's camps that many schools go to in the summer in which no pads are worn, these camps were after official practice started, and they were full pads with lots of hitting and lots of scrimmaging. My first camp experience was at Lower Richland High School with the legendary coach Mooney Player. He took us off to the mountains where it was supposed to be cooler. And as memory serves me, it was somewhere in North Georgia. As soon as we got there, we saw there was a lake. Everyone wanted to go swimming. When I say everyone, I mean everyone with a mistaken impression of why we were actually there. We were not there to swim. But players kept begging Coach to let us swim, so finally he gave in and told us to get ready and meet at the dock. Told us nobody went in until he said so, and no one came out until he said so. We lined up, and he told us to jump in. Now, we had never experienced cold mountain water before and had no idea what we were jumping into. We were freezing, but he made us stay in there until he was ready to let us out. Nobody bothered him again the rest of the week about going swimming. Some 55 years later, a group of coaches on my staff were sitting around talking about our experiences in high school. I brought up Coach Player. One of my assistants, Greg Thomas, who was about my age, said, "I know him. We scrimmaged his Lower Richland team when I was in high school. We had a big fight with them at camp." It was at that point I realized that we were both in camp together from 2 different schools that scrimmaged and got into a big fight at camp. We didn't meet each other until 35 years after that experience, unless we met in the middle of the fight. The thing I remember most about the fight was that the starters had finished, taken off their pads and gone to the buses, while the younger players continued, and the fight broke out. Players piled off the bus, came running back to join in on this free-for-all. Once it was over, Coach Player told us it was some of the stupidest stuff he'd ever seen. "Some of y'all out there swinging with your helmets. That's just plain stupid. Keep your helmet on for protection. Hit them with your shoes if you need to swing something." Well, the camp food and the competition at camp didn't seem to suit Coach Player at all, and he took us home early. Now, we were silly enough to think that meant we'd be able to skip out on some practices. Nope. We were on the practice field as soon as the bus got back to school. Now, the problem with the camp food, well, camp food can be kind of hit and miss. And it always makes a difference in whether or not a team comes back to camp. Around 1967, my dad changed jobs and I transferred from Lower Richland to Edmonds High School, which is now known as Sumter High School. And I was again fortunate enough to play for another legendary coach, Steve Satterfield. Coach Satterfield would later go on to be an assistant coach at Clemson. And he won a national championship as the head coach at Wofford College. Well, one year he took us to camp in Maxton, North Carolina. There's nothing to recommend Maxton. It is literally in the middle of nowhere. For breakfast at this camp, they served us hamburger patties and called them breakfast patties. At lunch, we had hamburgers, same patties. At dinner, they threw some gravy on the same frozen patties and called it Salisbury steak. This is nearly every meal. Needless to say, he didn't take us back there the next year. One of my lasting memories of camp at Edmonds High School was the night a few players slipped away from camp when we were at Presbyterian College, and they went into the small town of Clinton. They got caught. I can still vividly remember the sound of whistles blowing in the middle of the night and looking out to see the coaching staff, most of them in their underwear, running those guys up and down the campus quad. Now, more than 20 years later, as a head coach, I wanted that same camp experience for my players at McBee. But we didn't have the money to take teams off to camp, and the players didn't have the money to pay for camp. So we got creative. I remember back in high school with Coach Player that during the first week of practice, before we went off to camp in the mountains, he'd have the players stay most of the week at school. There would be cots and sleeping bags in the gym, and he had the school cafeteria staff serve us meals. I decided I'd try something similar at McBee. I arranged to get Army cots from the county civil defense office. God forbid that a natural disaster should hit Chesterfield County in early August. Now, of course, the person who allocated the cots claimed that they were being moved to the high school as a test of how they could be deployed from the civil defense office in Chesterfield over to the high school in McBee. Yeah. We got restaurants around town to serve us meals at a discount. There's no way we're going to get the cafeteria staff to come in and cook for us. So we would come in for a day and spend the night. Then we'd go home after evening practice. The next day, we'd bring the players back in for morning practice. And so on throughout the week. Now, we could easily get in 3 practices a day, sometimes maybe 4, and some meeting time to help us prepare for the season. One issue we ran into was I had not completely counted on the propensity of young men to come off a football field hot and tired and then to gorge themselves on a full country breakfast. After several incidents of players throwing up in front of the regular customers, we lost our breakfast spot. The cots also turned into a problem eventually. No, not with the civil defense people. You see, the gym wasn't air conditioned, so we needed a cool place to put the players and their cots. So we crowded them all into the cafeteria. Now, I had a group of coaches sleep right across the hall from the cafeteria in the library, and I was right up the hall on a couch in the guidance office. We were making the most of all air-conditioned space in the small school, but staying close enough to supervise, although that seems to be more allegedly supervised. I should have known that the fire ants being lured into the library to get to the food that the assistant coaches left lying around was an omen for the week. In the middle of the second night, the sound of coaches yelling and running about woke everybody up. The ants had gotten into their cots. The next night, again well after they should have been asleep, some of the younger players who weren't tired enough to go to sleep got a little rambunctious and began running around chasing each other. One of the older players said something to one of them, and the younger kid talked smack back to him. So the older kid took the stick at the end of his cot and threw it. The stick missed the kid he was throwing at, but it did hit the wall, splintered into 2 pieces, and one of the pieces came back off the wall and hit another player. Drayton Dorn was just trying to sleep. This broken projectile hit just below his eyebrow, and it caused a big gash and a lot of blood, spurting blood. Now, they were scared to death, especially with the blood, but also with the thought of having to tell coaches that they had been up in the middle of the night horseplaying. Somebody had gotten hurt during the horseplay. Now, the injured player's aunt was our women's basketball coach, and she lived a block from the school. Paul Roberts, our quarterback, was her son. So he and Drayton decided they would call her first. They were hoping that she would rush over, stop the bleeding, and that somehow the football coaches would never find out. Now, she, of course, told them to go to me immediately. Now, small disclaimer here. She's currently my wife. Paul is now my stepson, and Drayton is my nephew. Anyhow, they were out of options. So they came to the guy's office, banged on the door, and woke me up. Turned on the light, opened the door, and there were the two of them standing there. Both of them covered in blood, and with blood spurting out of the gash each time Drayton's heart beat. I got the coaches up. We applied some gauze, called his parents, and we rushed him to the hospital. It's about 15 miles away. Of course, they got him all sewed up and fixed up. 25 years later, he still has a nice scar right below his eyebrow. I don't think his mom ever forgave me. She's now my sister-in-law. That was the end of the stay-at-school camps for me. My next head coaching job would be at a place where there was plenty of money to go off to camp. Now, that doesn't mean we didn't run into more adventures, but those are stories for another time. I'll see you next week.